It's about 3 years since I installed the panels you can see behind me. I thought it might be a good opportunity to review the data on the payback from these panels, and in conjunction with that there have been a couple of very significant changes in terms of how the panels operate. Octopus have introduced a new tariff called Intelligent Octopus, which gives very cheap rate for 6 hours during the night, and it also takes control of the charging of the car so that they can maximise the benefit from selling the load management to the grid. So that's one big change, and I'll talk through that in more detail. The other thing is that they've increased significantly their tariff for export. So they were only giving me 4p a unit for export, and now they're giving 15 pence, which is a huge change. It makes exporting, particularly when you bear in mind you can buy the power for 7 pence, it makes exporting at 15 pence a no-brainer. I've programmed my Tesla Powerwall to export power, so that now knows the tariffs that I have, and it will use its own artificial intelligence to decide when to import and when to export power. So I can show you the impact of those to my projected costs. The final thing to mention is, you probably just see in the background there is a heat pump. It's only been installed a few days, so I don't have any data on it, but I can anticipate what the savings will be from the heat pump and what the impact of having this heat pump will be on the overall bill. There's really been three very significant changes in recent months. The first one is Intelligent Octopus was an Intelligent Octopus tariff introduced. So that's a tariff that's open to owners of compatible EVs and car chargers. And basically Octopus controls when the car is charged, and that enables them to pass on quite big savings to customers. So they do a fantastic rate where they do 6 hours at 7.5 pence, and then the other 18 hours at 30 pence per kilowatt hour. It has completely changed my behaviour in terms of how I operate the tariff. Previously, I would spend significant time each day trying to identify how to use my own power. So setting the immersion heater, setting the time the car would charge, all these things, doing my utmost not to export any power because the payback from the power from exporting it was so small. But this change just means it's dead simple now. What you do is you do everything you possibly can at night and export whatever you can in the day. So it just makes life so much easier in terms of how you manage the power and so forth. This is the Octopus app. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So if you go to devices now, I've come back, I've done 20 odd miles today, and I just program my car in, and Intelligent Octopus can effectively knows what charge limit I want and knows when I want the car charged by. And I put 6 a.m. I never need it at that time, to be honest, but I've left it at 6 a.m. Come back, plug the charger in, and it starts charging for a bit, and then Octopus switch it off, and they program time, so they're going to charge it between 2:30 and 3 and 3:30 and 4 a.m. So that's all it needs because it's on a big charge tonight. And that's obviously times they've chosen which enable them to either make money or make savings with the grid, because they can trade. A service where you have load management is a service the grid will pay for. So
that's quite interesting because I'm on Octopus Go,
yeah,
and I think I'm from 12:30 until 4:30 in the morning
on 9 pence or something.
Yeah, which means we switch on our dishwasher and washing machine at 12:30.
Yeah,
and so they've actually given you a slot. Was it 1:30 you said there?
It's but I've got 6 hours anywhere from 11:30 to 5:30, and the reason they can do it for this is because effectively having control of charging my car is a service they can sell.
But they've actually chosen your charge time.
That's right, based on the grid prices and the supply levels they predicted at tonight. So the other thing you can do is if you want to charge at any time, you can press bump charge.
Okay.
So if you do that, it'll start charging, but you'll pay normal rates, or if you've got excess solar, you can do it off your solar as well. It is interesting because it does bring into question some of the smarter chargers and if there's any need for them anymore. I've got a Zappy charger which can do things like divert excess solar to the grid, but as I say, there is no point in that anymore. All I'll do is charge at night and then export what I can in the day. you can probably see from this spreadsheet behind, I've captured a huge amount of data on the energy I've used. I've got information on what comes from the panels, the total I use for the house and the car, what goes to the grid, what comes from the grid, net usage. I know how much I'm putting into the car, I know how much I put into the immersion heater, and so I can break down my usage for the whole period that I've had the system. So what I've done is I've done some costing for some various scenarios. So the first thing I did was just look back at my costs for the last 12 months. I just literally took the bills I've had from Octopus and looked at the cost of those. So the top one up here. So last year I paid £398 for electricity, £591 for gas, and that includes the standing charge. So I paid a little under £1,000 last year for heating the house, heating the hot water, charging the car.
So that's your total energy.
That's total energy costs.
House and car.
House and car. Mm. So that's an extremely good rate. I was on Octopus Go last year, which gave I think it was 7.5p rate at night for 4 hours. And then a significantly higher daytime rate. I don't exactly remember what that was. So that's the scenario what I paid last year. The next thing I've done is a sort of baseline scenario. So what I've done is looked at what it would cost me if I didn't have the EV or any of the solar setup at all.
So no solar,
that's right,
diesel or petrol car, gas, etc. Yeah,
that's right. So what I've done here is the electricity use is less because I've taken out what it costs to charge the car, the number of kilowatt hours it took to charge the car. So there'd be 1,490 on electricity charges, another 190 for standing charges. So my electricity bill would be just under £1,700.
And that's for the house?
That's
only
for the house.
Yeah, okay.
That's right.
Okay.
No car charging in that. Then the gas would have been, again, I've broken it down. I've got the exact number of kilowatt hours, etc. from my smart meter. So the gas would be £480 if I didn't have any of this. And then on top of that, for the Ford Focus diesel, doing 10,000 miles, which is what I typically do, it would be, assuming 50 miles a gallon, it works out at £1,165 in fuel. So my total base case energy use would be £3,325. So you can see the tariff I had last year is a very good saving on that. It's £2,000 plus saving on the base case. But then in the third scenario, I've looked ahead to what happens now. I've got intelligent Octopus, higher export payments, an EV and a heat pump. For the heat pump, it's only an estimate at this point, but I've tried to be quite conservative about this. I'm hoping its performance will be significantly better than the figures I've used here. So what I've done is, again, I've stripped out the electricity that I would use without the heat pump. So that works out at £290. And what I've done here is I've got a mix of power at 7.5p and 30p. So I've looked back, and 90% of the power I use will be from low cost. So the blended average is the 9p a unit. So the cost of electricity without the heat pump will be £290, and then there's a standing charge of £190 so my electricity import would be £480. But also what I have is a much higher export payments now. So because of my change in
just stop here. So what we're saying is this will be what you anticipate your total electricity import into the house.
That's right, and what I would pay
for everything, for your car, for your heat pump.
Not for the heat pump.
Okay.
So that's the car, and the house, but not the heat pump.
Okay.
I'll do the heat pump in a second.
Okay.
So that's £480, and then, as I say, much higher energy export. So in the appendix of this, I've got the detailed calculations, but I currently export about 1,200 kilowatt hours, and that's doing my best to export absolutely nothing because they paid me so little for it. With these changes I've described, I would anticipate I'll export 3,700 kilowatt hours.
That's roughly 3 times.
That's 3 times, yeah.
Mm.
Now, this is where the heat pump starts to come in. The heat pump I'm anticipating, because I've looked at the excess I have in the winter, and again I've got much more detailed reasoning behind this in the appendix. The heat pump would use up 900 kilowatt hours of that excess. So on average in the winter I produce about 5 kilowatt hours from my solar
per day.
And I also have an excess in my battery from charging it overnight of about 5 kilowatt hours. So I'm anticipating that I can use 900 kilowatt hours to feed directly into the heat pump. But the total export with that 900 kilowatt hours taken out still gives me £420
surplus.
Payment if you like. So I pay 480 and I get paid 420. The heat pump power output, and I've got this from my gas usage last year. So the gas put out 5,020 kilowatt hours of heat, and I've got a smart meter, and I've got all the calculations to convert that into kilowatt hours. So the heat pump should do at least a seasonal coefficient of performance of 3. I'm hoping for significantly better than that, but that's a very conservative case, in which case it needs an energy input of 1,700 kilowatt hours. Now, as I said, 900 of that will come from basically excess from my battery and from solar. And then the 800 other kilowatt hours will be paid at peak rate, and that works out at £240. So if you add all these up, the total electricity minus the payment I get for exporting, plus the extra cost of the heat pump, I reckon my fuel bills next year for everything, including heating the house, driving the car, all the house use, will be around the £300 mark.
Poor.
So it's a huge saving. I mean, it surprised me when I did it.
So just going back then, we were saying before, was it this figure here, 3,300?
Yeah.
If you'd done nothing.
Yeah.
And with you having done that, it's 300.
£300, yeah.
Incredible.
As I say, I hope it's better than that.
It'd be interesting to see.
It will. So in a year's time, I can do another analysis, another look at this. I've just drawn some quick conclusions. Total savings expected of 3,000 a year from my setup versus a conventional setup. And obviously the question that then is posed is how much have I paid to have this installed and so forth, and is the investment worth it? So the solar and home battery cost about £13,000 3 years ago. So that's a 6.3 kilowatt peak of solar and a 5 kilowatt inverter and a Tesla Powerwall battery. But then if you look at the other things, I've got an electric car, but it needed a replacement car. So I haven't tried to figure out how much more the electric car costs than a conventional car. You can certainly pay a hell of a lot more for a conventional car than I paid for an electric car. So it really is a hard thing to put a figure on. The other thing is the heat pump. But I look back at my costs for replacing my gas boiler 5.5 years ago, and that was £4,800 then, and the heat pump has cost me £6,200 approximately now. So the gas boiler change cost me more than the heat pump will have done, once you've taken into account inflation. So incredible. Really, I think these are things you need. They're not so much investments, they're just an alternative purchasing decision. So really, I think the main investment is 13,000. The solar and the battery is the thing that I didn't have to do, but I want a car and I want to heat my house. So the returns are very high. What's that, about 25% or something like that? And obviously it's tax free because it's a saving rather than a cost. So I think you'd be hard pressed to find something else you could invest in that would give you that sort of return.
You're being quite conservative because also the car doesn't have any tax on it.
No tax on it, yeah. And the servicing cost should be much less.
Yeah. Well, I think your car is every 2 years.
That's right, service every 2 years. I mean, and very
so
much fewer.
There are other things around, yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing from my point of view is the environmental benefit. I want to do everything I possibly can to stop burning fossil fuels and reduce my carbon output. So Solar Edge, the inverter manufacturers, do a do an analysis of how much CO2 you're saving. And they've got quite a good page explaining exactly how that's all done. And it's reasonably conservative, so they look at where you live. So in the UK, we have quite good electricity grid in that there's a large percentage of it is green. So they're comparing my production against what the average for the grid is. And they're saying I'll save 1.1 tonnes of CO2 per year by having my solar. But if you were to compare it, say, with just burning coal or gas with no electricity, it would be much higher outputs than that, much more higher savings rather on CO2.
So just go through that again. What you're saying is they're kind of comparing the mix of electricity in the grid.
That's right.
So you've got some wind, you've got some solar, you've got some gas and
That's
some
right.
coal.
So if you look at the UK
UK
grid, something like over 40% is from renewable sources with zero carbon.
Okay.
So that's really taking a situation where only half the grid emits carbon. And also a lot of the rest is gas, which is better than coal. But if you looked at countries like Poland, they got much higher natural carbon outputs. But I think it's reasonable to argue actually that most of the extra kilowatt hours I produce are displacing gas, not other renewables. So I think this is a very conservative way of looking at the emission savings that the system gives us.
So what do you have to do to get to zero?
Well, yeah, I was going to come to that. I mean, the other thing to quickly say is it points out that it's equivalent to planting 69 trees a year, and again they do all the analysis. So, again, it's something you can do within the boundaries of your own property.
So if each person did this, or even
that's right,
10% of the people, one in 10 people did it, it would be very significant.
Very significant. Yeah, that leads on to your other question. I mean, part of the frustration at the moment is I would like to go further and actually install enough panels to make myself net zero from my own house heating, car point of view, and I'm more than halfway there at the moment. But the DNO, the district network operator or electrical connection company locally, won't let me connect any more power. So they are monitoring the load on the local area and being very conservative about how much power they allow me to connect. I think it's a great shame because, as you've just mentioned, if everyone were to do some of this, then it could be a huge contribution to us all being net zero, and we can help each other out. I can literally supply my near neighbours as the power won't go very far, and they can do the same when I need the power. So hopefully that'll change.
I think a couple of things there. One is you are using your own private money.
That's right.
To do this investment, as opposed to the government having to do it. Also, with the extra panels and things, they aren't taking up your garden, are they?
No.
They're on your building.
On the building.
So again, it's not as if you're destroying the garden or the landscape or...
No, that's right.
Whatever. So the DNO, their restrictions, means that us as ordinary people's impact or how we can contribute is being regulated.
I think the first point in particular is a very good one, in that this is a way that private individuals can invest. This is a way that government can get private people to put their own money into actually achieving net zero. So it seems a great shame that it's being stopped, because the economics, as you've just seen, are starting to speak for themselves. And if the DNO would remove the roadblock, they would, maybe have different goals where they have to accept everyone putting 2 or 3 times the amount of energy on, and they make the changes required. It would make a big impact, in my view.
Fantastic.
I think the final point and the conclusion is some of these facilities and some of these tariffs weren't there when I installed solar years ago, but I know the trajectory is such that there'll be more and better offerings going forward, more intelligent use of batteries and load management, etc. So I'm very confident that going forward there'll be better tariffs and better returns for individuals.
Off recording, you mentioned this. You called this a revolution.
Yes, I think it's a massive revolution, and it's a revolution that people aren't noticing. And I'd really urge people to get on board and do what they can to be part of it. And I think if they're not, they're going to miss out. I think people are very put off by some of the press articles they read, which often, in my opinion, are funded by the fossil fuel industry, which are mounting a rearguard action to stop these changes from happening because they want to preserve their businesses for as long as they possibly can. But it makes no sense. Solar is the cheapest form of power ever known to mankind, and I think if each of us did something to embrace it, it would be really helpful.
And also, we're talking about this in South Wales.
Yeah.
You looked at a distant relation in South Africa.
Yeah.
And he had even more solar, didn't he?
He did. I mean, the advantage they have is if you look across to here, this shows me the annual sort of figures. So you can see, obviously, in the spring and summer, I get very good output, but in the winter, it falls off. But in South Africa, in the location they were at, they had pretty well flat solar all year because their winters are sunny and their summers are less sunny, so they equalised out. So it's an absolute no-brainer in my view in a climate and an environment like that one.
Fascinating. Thank you very much.